Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be taking a look at the weekly meta breakdown for Standard Best of 3, Traditional Standard, Standard with a sideboard, whatever you want to call it. We're going to be taking a look at data from both UntapGG, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, tracks ladder results for users. You can track your own win rates, aggregates with other users, gives a whole bunch of cool stats. If you want to use some tap, link is in the video description. So we're going to take a look there. We're also going to look at some MTGO results and then some early community results just in terms of ladder or placements. One thing to note, Standard RCQ Regional Championship Qualifier are going to be taking place in the coming months. So we're going to see more of a shift to paper Standard again, hopefully. Something I noticed, like I picked up the cards for Mono Red and Paper a couple months ago, and like Bloodthirsty Adversaries are spiking in price. Virtues are going up, like White Virtue is going up in price. Shieldred's the cost of like a Toyota Corolla at this point. So a lot of price spikes that have gone up in terms of standard cards. So nature is potentially healing on that front. But we're going to take a look, since it's the beginning of the month, we're going to be looking Platinum to Mythic. Some cases I went to Diamond just to get a little bit more suitable lists. And we'll jump into it. I'll timestamp everything, so don't worry, link it, you can import it. In terms of popularity of the day for Platinum to Mythic rank, we have Esper Midrange and 4-color Domain just pretty much at 23%. So about anywhere between a quarter and a fifth of your games should be against these two decks. The next most represented decks we have are Mono Red at 15%. People are still playing Golgari at 14. Golgari's been like low 50s for some time. Has a really tough time into like the domain decks and stuff like that. 5-color Domain could still be a Lara combo. Sometimes the classification of 4-color Domain also gets hit if they're playing at Tali or not sometimes. Boros Convoke is like the white-based humans list that splashes red for Yodi or the Hasty dude. That gives all your creatures a buff. Azorius Soldiers, Red Aggro, kind of rounding it up. We look at kind of the trends. Esper Domain had a big shoot up and has been consistently one of the most represented decks on the ladder. We see ebbs and flows in terms of the actual Domain deck, with it increasing and kind of falling off. We see Mono Red kind of picking up a bit, especially with the ladder reset. And we've seen Golgari peak as high as like 16%, kind of drop down to 9%, and seeing it kind of pop up again. So within this list, there are a couple decks that have popped up in the last little bit, so we'll feature those. Most notable, there's a couple variations of Rakdos that have been becoming more popular, so we'll cover those. At least on the MTGO side, there's a blue-white Monastery Mentor deck that we'll take a look at, and a mono-white Toxic deck, top forward, one of the most recent standard challenges. But we'll take a look. Platinum to Mythic rank, December 27th through January 3rd, we had 37,000 best of 3 matches of Standard. And jumping into it, the highest win rate deck, at least in this rank, is 61% for Mono Red Aggro. There's actually a couple of variations. Someone got to number 1 Mythic with a slightly different version that we'll take a look as well. But the notable kind of change is we're seeing a lot of the lists now adopt the Witchstalker Frenzy in the main board. With a lot of 4 or 5 toughness creatures, this does a nice job, especially because it can cost as little as 1 mana. We're seeing fewer copies of Swiss Spear, just given that the ground usually gets clogged up fairly easy, where Phoenix Chick can still at least attack over the top. What's interesting is to see the 3 copies of Feldon. I usually don't like this many copies of Feldon in the list, given that it doesn't block, and against a lot of the white and black based removal, it's just a clean answer. But interesting to see that number with the split of the Charming Scoundrels. Still have your burn package, 3 Squeeze, 2 Godric's, and then 23 lands. Always kind of look at the configuration. Sometimes you see 2 Sokazens, sometimes you see upwards of 4 Foundries. I think this configuration is fine. 23 lands is appropriate. Sideboards are pretty clean at this point. Any of the Goad Wide token decks, you have that in Festivities. Lithomantic Barrage, good against Rafine and stuff like that. Furnace Punisher for the greedier mana bases, and Urbrask Forge for the heavy removal based decks. Now, what's interesting in kind of comparing, so this player, Moomin2369, got number 1 Mythic with it. And their list, we see the Kumanos, Swiss Spears is a full 4 of 2 Phoenix Chicks, so swapping those numbers there. 2 Charming Scoundrels, still the 3 Feldon, but we're seeing a full set of Obliterating Bolts, as well as the full Witchstalker Frenzy, which is kind of interesting. So in this case here, no Lightning Strike, opting to have 4 damage removal spells. in lieu of that. So they went 36-17, which is a pretty solid run, all things considered. So kind of interesting to see how that worked out for them, seeing that card in place of some of the other options. This one here, did they play best of one? No. But I will have to get their sideboard looks the same, I think. Let's take a look. Always fun trying to translate Furnace Punisher. They have Urbrass Forge. They might have Vampire's Vengeance instead. That seems to be the other card that they would be missing here. Oh, here we go. Yeah, they're on the Vampire's Vengeance plan. So very kind of similar idea, but interesting kind of slight variations, edge cases with that got them #1 Mythic. We next go to 4-color domain. So I went up to Diamond for this one. The Platinum version had a lot of like weird choices in the sideboard and stuff like that I didn't really want to represent. But kind of the big innovation that a lot of these decks have done recently is the intervention or inclusion of Cavern of Souls, naming angels to get uncounterable Atraxas as well as Archangel of Wrath. We've seen kind of a shift with Depopulate and Vanquish the Horde for any kind of the go wide. A little bit more in terms of sweepers to address trimming down on the number of invasions of Zendikar. Seeing Wandering Emperor in here. So it's pretty much a green-white deck at this point with the splash for Atraxa. Up the Beanstalks, Topiary Stomper help you ramp. A little bit more early interaction as well as sweepers for creature decks. Nissa on the top end helps also in the mirror, just blowing up your opponent's leyline bindings, as well as Herd Migration to help smooth out your mana, give you another win condition. Your mana base, or sorry, your sideboard, you have Lithomantic Barrage, Rafine and Friends, Negate for just counter spells. Chromehost Seed Shark could come in if your opponent is bringing in like a lot of Disdainful Strokes or just helps you go more threat dense. In like the post-board games, Knockout Blow for the aggressive decks, particularly mono red. Lockdown again for the aggressive decks. Obstinate Baloth can be for the heavy discard decks or again for the more aggressive decks as well. You can kind of just shift, kind of move down your curve and then play more chunky beaters. We then go to Esper Midrange at 58%, and this one's like the Schooner version. A lot of them have moved off of the dedicated legend packages. Those ones are pretty linear in terms of creatures, but we've seen a lot of the decks now, and we'll see it in Rakdos adopt Preacher of the Schism. 3 mana, 2/4 Death Touch. When it attacks player with the most life or tied, you get to create a 1/1 vampire with lifelink. And then when it attacks, if you have the most life, then you get to draw a card and lose the life. So utility creature, also decent blocker, dodges cut down, as well as lightning strike. So we're seeing like the obliterating bolts hitting these big creatures has some utility. Gix for card advantage, or Fiend kind of loots through your hands. Some Schooners in here. Still your Fairy Mastermind package, Deep Cavern Bat. So evasive creatures that have utility that can get bigger, and then an assortment of counters as well as removal between Destroy Evil, Cut Down, or Go for the Throat, Shieldred, and Urtai on the top end. Your sideboard's just going to be an assortment of kind of disruption, whether it be removal, cut down, anoint with affliction, destroy evils. You have a bunch of counter spells where needed. Another Lauren for artifact enchantment hate. Tishana's Tidebinder as a nice way to stifle any triggered abilities. Archangel of Wrath, Atraxa, Leyline Binding, any of those types of effects. Your opponent's Rafine even. Then there's Alkazotz, the Black God. The grindier matchups can be used for like discard. Also reasonable against more aggressive decks, just giving you a lifelink attacker. Gix Command is a sweeper that can be brought in and kind of give you value in the grindier matchups as well. So the kind of hot deck of the week, it is Azorius Tempo. So someone actually ported this over to Alchemy and got #1 Mythic shortly thereafter. Our mono red player did. But the deck is bringing back Monastery Mentor. So it's kind of a mashup between like a mono blue Tempo and in like the Azorius colors. So you're self-milling with Picklock Prankster as well as Philology Archaeologist. And then what you're doing is you're using either Recommission or Helping Hand to return a creature with 3 CMC or less. So you're kind of bypassing the casting cost of Monastery Mentor, or just because this card is going to be a kill on spot, you could keep bringing it back. Your Yahadi Jin as well, which could come back, another effective beater that reduces mana costs. Then Get Lost is removal, some cheap interaction, Otherworldly Gaze, another way to fill your graveyard, March Swirly Mist for protection, Sleight of Hand, like just a bunch of cheap card draw afterwards, make a bunch of tokens, kind of kill them that way there. Temporary Lockdown for the aggressive decks, Licensors for the graveyard decks, Knockout Blow for mono red, counter spells, Destroy Evil, Invoke the Winds to steal your opponent's Atraxa, and then some Wandering Emperors if you want to play like the Tempo Flash game against heavy removal as well. From there, we also have another different Azorius deck, because today's just how many flavors of Azorius. This is a blue-white artifact craft deck. Hope your opponent doesn't have Farewell. So it's things like Unstable Glyph Bridge. So this is basically kind of like a board wipe. Each player chooses a creature power 2 or less that player controls and destroy all the rest. You could then craft it, and then it becomes a 5/3 whenever an opponent casts a spell. You just get this. Oh, no, that's just a fixed menu. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, they can attack. You are a Planeswalker, and then if they attack. So it's kind of like a prison style effect. Market Gnome can be used as an early blocker that when it dies kind of loots itself, or when you craft it, so you get some value. Thran Spider helps you ramp with the Power Stones, Leveler on the top end. Then you have Constructed All-Star Braided Nets. Kind of just tap down your creatures. You can craft this one as well. And then it shuffles into your library, draws you a bunch of cards. You have Chimley to kind of cascade into your other effects. Fabrication Module as ramp, or just activating abilities. So it lets you play into the bigger stuff. And then kind of bring back stuff in that case. Glass Casket, Spring-Loaded Saw Blades as removal, similar with Mike Stone Meatstone. Thousand Moon Smithies is kind of your win condition, just as a way to make tokens, which is nice. Iron Crag for ramp, Depopulate. So kind of a lot of cool effects here. Kind of like a block constructed almost deck. Artifact theme seems pretty cool. Obviously Farewell absolutely dumpsters this deck, but we hope that our opponents left their Farewells at home, or they couldn't find them at the vendors at the RCQ. Glass Caskets for more removal. So it's basically just removal, counter spells, Tashana again, Chrome Seed Shark. When your opponent's going to be siding out removal, you bring it in and kind of differentiates your threats as well. So then we have kind of 3 variations of Rakdos we're going to look at. So this one's Rakdos Discover. So this is kind of a mid-rangey shell of Rakdos using like Geological Appraiser, similar to Bloodbraid Elf. So this list here got 5-0 on one of the MTGO challenges by Handsome PPZ. And you're just having like cheap creatures that with like Evasion, Fairy Dream Tree, Thief, Deep Cavern Bat. You have the Preacher of Schisms full playset here, Arcfiend Ladros. Gix draws you cards with all these cheap creatures, Bloodtithe Harvesters, Sheoldreds. Inti is also really nice of like the looting effect to make your things bigger. Bitter Triumph, cut down, go for the throat. Kind of cool line with Bitter Triumph. You discard a card with Inti out, and then you get to exile a card and then cast that. So some cool synergy there. Brotherhood's End for sweepers. If they're going wider, cut downs, more Sheoldreds, discard effects. Just kind of the do I want to be more discard focused for the more control-y decks, more removal focused, kind of shifting your approach through that. So there's that version, which is a creature heavier version. There's kind of the same idea. This one's on just a little bit larger of a curve with Trumpeting Carnosaur. So I'll include both of these. This one got top 32. So Carnosaur and Geological Appraiser. You have like Extract the Truth for Leyline Bindings, Cruelty of Gix. So a little bit more mid-rangey focused version of the deck versus a slightly more aggressive version. So we're seeing not a consistent necessarily approach, but still like crazy. It's just crazy the price of Sheoldreds. This is US. Like in Canada, they're like $150 now. And then lastly, there's the Rakdos Ramp version of the deck. So this version here is Italis and Trumpeting Carnosaurs on the top end, but you're using like big score to try to go into these. You're also playing Breach the Underworld or Breach the Multiverse along with Chandra Hope's Beacon to kind of double up. So this one's really trying to prey on those green-white or domain ramp decks to try to cast all their big stuff, steal their Atraxas, stuff of that nature. Otherwise, the deck's just a bunch of removal, Brotherhood's End, Burn Down the House, Virtue Persistence. So just a lot of removal, packing big kind of top end Timmy bombs, and then trying to ramp it up to it. Sideboard, again, just like hand hate, removal, preacher if you want to shift more mid-range and put more pressure, shield druids, kind of stonewall some decks, and then hand hate kind of mixed in. And then the last spicy deck, top 4 in the MTGO challenge. This was by John Move. It is mono white toxic. So not your green white toxic version, but you got stuff like Crawling Chorus, Skrelvs in here, Destroy Evils, Jawbone Duelist. So toxic, toxic, toxic. The Annex Sentry's toxic, Skrelv Hive's toxic. Charge of the Mites makes you some more creatures. Toskia's Welcome draws you cards off all these little mites, which is kind of cool. The Skrelv's Hive Toskia Welcome draws you a card every turn, which is kind of cool interaction. White Sun's Twilight as a sweeper that also makes you tokens. Expel the Interceptors as just kind of a sweeper that you can kind of name, 1 power and kill everything else, which is kind of cool. Lay Down Arms, Myrex, as well as Secor. Sideboard's just like removal options, more Annex Sentry as kind of removal, Knockout Blow, Sarah Paragon for grindier matchups, Welcoming Vampire draws you some cards, and then more sweeper options. So it's kind of cool because you can just shift into like heavy control, you can shift to more aggressive decks. So it's interesting to see this kind of deck here. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, and if you're going to be participating, I'm actually going to be playing in my local RCQ. It's actually Ravnica Remastered Sealed Trios. So myself and 2 buddies, we're going to be competing in that, hopefully get my RC invite that way. And then if I have time, I'll try mono red in standard for the standard portion. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there.